Joining me now, as he does every fortnight, is founder and president of the Centre for Industrial Progress, Alex Epstein. He's here to give us the straight facts on all things energy and climate, and gosh, we need his insights right now. I don't know if you've filled up your car lately, but it is frightening. Alex, we're paying more than $2 a litre in this country. Who's to blame for the cost of fuel? Is it all Putin's fault, or is it a bit more complex than that?
It's definitely more complex. I mean, Putin is an incredibly evil actor, and there's a lot to say about that situation. I think with energy, he's particularly responsible for the instability and the insecurity that, in particular, Europe is increasing, although they're responsible themselves because they didn't engage in the domestic production and transport that they should have. But around the world, I think the whole situation is pretty simple. I mean, if you look at before the pandemic, there were certain price levels, and now they're considerably higher. Now, what changed? Did it change that we have not enough oil? No. Did people forget how to produce oil? No. But what did happen is the culmination of decades of anti-oil policies, which said it's wrong to finance oil, it's wrong to produce oil, it's wrong to transport oil. Those forces got an incredible just death grip on the global markets, particularly during the pandemic. And so what's happened is, because of political policies mostly, supply cannot rise to meet demand. And so if you have demand outstripping supply, the prices go up. So it's a very simple situation that's primarily caused by global politics, yet the people who've caused the problem want to evade responsibility, so they push it on everything but the obvious answer, which is themselves and their policies.
And what we're seeing now, Alex, I mean, it's crystal clear that nations need to be as energy independent as possible and have a cheap, reliable source of energy. Yet we've got the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, saying it would be madness, and I quote, risk mutually assured destruction to turn back to fossil fuels. What's your response to that?
I mean, my first response is, why are we listening to this guy? So this is a lifelong socialist, so the ideology that killed 100 million people in the 20th century. And he heads the UN, which at the moment is even more of a failure than usual, given that Russia is allowed to attack Ukraine with impunity. And what's going on really is this guy has been in denial about how much better the world has been getting because of low-cost, reliable energy from fossil fuels. And what's happening now is we've restricted low-cost, reliable energy from fossil fuels. The price of energy determines the price of everything. All the prices have gone up. You know, agricultural prices go up, including fertilizer prices going up. Like, everything is getting worse because energy prices are going up. And he's so clueless that he thinks, yeah, let's get off fossil fuels more. But it was the attempt to get off fossil fuels and the false promise that they could rapidly be replaced by unreliable solar and wind that led to the problem in the first place. So this guy, as usual, is exactly on the wrong side of everything.
Well, it's like these clueless lefties in the States who are basically advising people, and we've got them right here in Australia, advising people, well, just go out and buy an electric car. I mean, telling people who can't afford to fill their cars with petrol to just go out and spend $80,000, $90,000 on a new electric car. Like, it's doable for everybody. And talking about America, they're seeing record gas prices over there, and there's renewed calls for the US to increase domestic energy production. And Joe Biden claims, Alex, that his administration is doing nothing to restrict local supply. Is he telling us the truth there?
I mean, this is really unbelievable to me that he can get away with this, and that he even thought he could get away with this. I mean, he ran on "we will end fossil fuel." Like, I guarantee you we'll do it. And he is a leader in a movement that for 15 plus years has been restricting financing of oil, has been restricting production, has been restricting transportation. And that has become very, very successful. And that's why supply can't rise to meet demand. Now, what's happening is what they've basically been doing is they've been making it impossible or unprofitable to drill for oil. But what they're saying now is they're asking companies, hey, why don't you drill for oil, even though we've threatened you with destruction for drilling for oil? Even today, the SEC came out with this crazy climate thing that threatens companies and investors for being involved with oil. And they're saying, hey, why don't you produce more oil? Why don't you invest more? why would anyone invest in something where you're threatened by the government? So they're saying, yeah, just produce as much as we want because it'll help us get votes. And the companies are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to produce when it's profitable. So the government's job is to make it profitable to produce energy by leaving everyone free. They're restricting everyone's freedom, and then they're complaining, hey, why aren't we getting as much oil production as we want this second so that we can get votes before we oppose oil tomorrow when we feel like we don't need the votes?
It's pure chutzpah, isn't it? They are deliberately causing the problem and then completely washing their hands of it and going, oh, we're just left with this mess. And last week, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that oil and gas CEOs are fully responsible for domestic energy production not increasing, and the government has no responsibility or role to play there. Let's have a listen.
Well, I think it's hard for them to make the argument it's anything other than business decisions on their part.
Now, Alex, we know the bulk of the US media is very much on side with the Democrats. Is there much scrutiny of the messages that we're seeing there and some fact-checking happening, or the public are just accepting the explanation they're getting from the White House?
Let's just say I don't think Facebook has done any fact checking on this. I don't think Twitter has done any fact checking. I don't think PolitiFact has done any fact checking. I mean, this is just such a distortion of reality. What they're doing is they're just trying to deny the obvious fact that they've restricted the supply of fossil fuels. That was the whole goal of the movement. Even today, as I said, the SEC is telling people, do not invest in fossil fuels. If you invest in fossil fuels, you are threatening, quote, the climate. So they've created this environment where it's unprofitable to invest in a lot of fossil fuel development that would be profitable without their threats. And then they're saying, hey, why are you making this business decision not to produce fossil fuels? It's like, it's an obvious thing. So as I told Psaki on Twitter, not that she would listen, but your job is to liberate the industry, and then that will make it profitable for them to drill a lot quickly. But as long as you threaten them, they absolutely should not drill. But the administration wants to make it unprofitable to drill, and then they want to command companies to drill unprofitably. That is really fascism, and it is just so shameful that they're trying to get away with it.
And at the same time, they're providing all these huge subsidies for renewables. So they're trying to end one sector and give a golden run to another. Their part in this cannot be underplayed. I just want to lastly ask you about the plan to go to despot nations like Iran and Venezuela to try to replace some of that Russian oil and gas. Is that something that they can rely on long term?
I mean, we really need a foreign policy in this country. It's not my expertise, but we need a real policy to deal with these countries. Look, we have an unbelievable ability to produce energy domestically. We've got like almost limitless coal, almost limitless oil, almost limitless gas, uranium. Like, we can do it all. We should be liberating that. That should be our fundamental policy, and everyone who is involved in restricting that needs to apologize. Instead of looking to blame other people, instead of evading responsibility, just admit, hey, we screwed up. We thought fossil fuels and nuclear could be rapidly replaced by unreliable solar and wind, which, by the way, is totally controlled by China. For some reason, we thought this was the path to prosperity and security. We were totally wrong. We apologize. Tell us what to do. Like, how about the people who were right all along are actually consulted? So, President Biden, I await your call, and I am ready to assist you.
Just one last question. You mentioned China there. You say they control solar and wind and renewables. Just explain that to the audience, what you mean by that.
Yeah, of course. So every industry has a supply chain, including the raw materials and crucially, including the processing of the raw materials. So China just dominates the processing of essentially every important raw material involved in solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. People think we have dependence on Russia for oil and gas. That is nothing compared to the total dependence on China for the whole supply chain. So China can just totally destroy solar, wind, and batteries basically at a moment's notice. They can do a lot of other things too. They have had this long-term strategy of world domination, and in particular, they've wanted to dominate these supply chains, including what are called rare earth elements. This is another way in which we need an energy policy that's long-term. We need a foreign policy that's long-term, and it is absolutely insane to think unreliable solar and wind sourced from China is some sort of savior of anything other. That is mutually assured destruction. Guterres there is he should be warning about solar, wind, and batteries instead of being a mindless propagandist for them.
Alex Epstein, thank you so much for joining me tonight.